There are moments in life when we believe that we are in control, that every single step has been planned, that every single dream has been carefully and meticulously mapped. But fate, like a silent, unseen storyteller, waits patiently in the wings, and then, without a single solitary warning, it twists the plot, tearing apart our precious and very fragile blueprints and forcing us to rewrite everything from scratch. For Elena Carter, her own life had once been a carefully and very beautifully drawn map. But the most important chapter, the one with all the real and very true meaning, had vanished, leaving behind nothing but a cold and very aching emptiness. At 25, Elena had been a top nursing student, a bright-eyed girl with gentle, healing hands and a heart that was full of a quiet and very powerful purpose. But life doesn't ask us what we want. And now, she was about to step into a world so far removed from her own, a world of a breathtaking and very empty luxury, where a little girl had stopped walking and a powerful and very broken man had stopped living. Before we dive into this incredible story of love, of loss, and of the profound and very beautiful healing of a broken family, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, My Truth Story, and share this story. When her father had passed away from a sudden and very brutal stroke, everything had collapsed. The medical debt had piled up. Her mother had sunk into a deep and very silent depression. And her younger 17-year-old brother still needed school, and he still needed her support. So she had folded away her own very precious dreams of the white coats and the stethoscopes, and she had taken on whatever job she could find just to keep a simple, humble roof over their heads. She had waited tables. She had cleaned houses. She had scrubbed other people's floors. And then, like a small and very unexpected sliver of a light in the darkness, a kind and very elderly neighbor had referred her to a wealthy family who was looking for a new nanny for their 4-year-old girl. "She's not like most kids," the neighbor had whispered, her own voice full of a quiet and very real sympathy. "She doesn't talk. She doesn't walk. She lost her own mom in a terrible accident just a year ago." "Are you interested?" Elena had hesitated. Being a nanny wasn't what she had wanted, but the rent was due. Her mother needed her medicine, and her brother needed his books. She didn't have a choice. That morning, New York City had worn its gray, in very indifferent face, the clouds as thick as a morning veil. Elena had taken the one long train ride uptown to the Upper West Side, hugging her own worn canvas bag to her chest. As she had stepped out of the subway, she had entered a different and very intimidating universe. The pristine sidewalks, the towering steel and glass buildings, the luxury cars that were lined up like a silent and very powerful army. She had felt completely and utterly out of place, as if she had just in that one single moment stepped into someone else's dream. But she had kept her head high, and she had walked on her own, very real heart pounding in her chest. Meanwhile, Ethan Blake, 33 years old, was living inside a beautiful and very fragile bubble of a pure, unadulterated privilege and a deep and very profound pain. His penthouse on the Upper West Side was a perfect and very tragic reflection of his own, meticulously curated and now very empty life. As the brilliant and very ruthless CEO of one of the city's most successful and most powerful architecture firms, he was known for his incredible talent and for his breathtaking arrogance. Wealth and power had turned him into a cold and very skeptical man. A man who no longer bothered to care about other people. But in his own perfect and very controlled world, there was one single, solitary blind spot: Sophie, his 4-year-old daughter. Ever since the accident, the one that had so brutally and so finally taken his wife's life, Sophie had fallen into a strange and very silent state. She didn't speak. She didn't walk. And she didn't respond. Despite being seen by the best and most expensive specialists in New York and in the entire world, no physical cause for her condition had ever been found. "It's psychological trauma," they had all said, their own voices a quiet and very practiced chorus of a very expensive and very useless sympathy. She just needs time. But as the time had passed, the pain had only grown deeper for both Ethan and for Sophie. The death of his beloved wife, Anna, had taken the best and most beautiful part of him, and he had become a machine, a man who was addicted to his own very empty sense of a control. In less than a single solitary year, he had already fired 3 different nannies. The last one, a highly respected child psychologist, had been let go for simply and with a great and very professional courage, suggesting that he should perhaps spend a little more time with his own, his very beautiful and very lonely daughter. "I work so that she can have the best," he had shouted. "Don't you dare bring that emotional and very pathetic nonsense into my house." He had refused to accept the truth that the problem wasn't Sophie, only was him, only one person. In his entire and very small and very insulated world had seen it clearly. Grace Blake, his mother, was a strong, kind woman with a heart that was full of a quiet and very profound wisdom. And so she had taken matters into her own very capable hands. And that morning, as Ethan was reading a project report in his vast and very silent home office, the intercom had buzzed. "She is here, Ethan," his mother's voice had said, a gentle and very hopeful sound. "Her name is Elena, and I need you to be kind to her." He had switched off the intercom without replying, his own jaw tightening. Another nanny, another failure, just waiting to happen. The penthouse, with its sleek modern furniture, expensive wall art, and breathtaking views of the city, felt more like a luxurious tomb than a home. There was no warmth, no life, just layers of glamour piled atop a deep emptiness. With a gentle gesture, Grace led Elena down the hallway to a quiet room. "She spends most of her time here," she said softly, in her own little world. The room looked like a child's dream, high-tech toys, giant stuffed animals, and a princess-style bed. But at the center of it all sat a small girl with dark hair and sad eyes curled up in the corner, clutching a worn-out plush rabbit. So tiny, so heartbreakingly alone, her name was Sophie, and her silence echoed through the room louder than any sound. Elena felt a tight knot form in her throat. That child was a mirror, a living, breathing reflection of her own pain, though born from different wounds. Sophie was trapped in a golden cage. Elena had spent her life fighting just to survive. In both their hearts lived the same hollow ache, the same unspoken loss. The first days passed in a heavy, suffocating stillness. The echo of Elena's own footsteps through the sprawling penthouse was often the only sound. Ethan carried on with his life like a well-oiled and very expensive machine. Morning workouts in his private gym, back-to-back meetings in his home office, and an endless silent stream of emails. Her presence in his home was like that of a ghost he had reluctantly allowed to take up residence. He saw her, but he didn't truly look. He spoke to her, but he never truly conversed. Their relationship was cold, distant, and defined by the invisible, and very high walls he never let her cross. Ethan Blake, a man who prided himself on being the sole and very powerful pillar of his own very broken household, simply ignored the new nanny's existence. That indifference brought Elena both a strange and very real sense of a relief, and a new and very profound anxiety. Their interactions were brief, they were tense, and they were filled with curt, almost imperceptible nods and sharp sideways glances. One morning, in the vast and very sterile kitchen, Elena was making a fresh strawberry juice for Sophie. She stood, bathed in the warm, golden sunlight that was pouring through the window, a picture of a quiet, domestic peace. And Ethan, who had just rushed down the grand spiral staircase, his tie askew, had paused. And for a single, fleeting second, he had seen her, and something about that simple and very normal moment had stunned him. It looked normal. It looked domestic. It looked for a fraction of a second like a family, something he had once had, and something he had so completely and so brutally lost. He had quickly turned away then, his own face scowling deeper. Still, she had made the orange juice. But the bitter and very ugly taste of that humiliation had stayed with her all day, and yet, almost imperceptibly, Elena began to build a quiet and very beautiful bridge to Sophie. The little girl who had once sat so silently, so completely, and so utterly in her own very lonely corner, now started to watch her with her own very wide and very curious eyes. Elena never forced her. She was simply ... there. She would sing the gentle and very beautiful lullabies her own mother had once sung to her. She would read the classic and very magical stories with a host of funny and very silly voices. And most importantly, she would touch her. Soft and very maternal and very real touch became the only language that Sophie, in her own very silent world, would accept. It was ridiculous, absurd, and it worked. A tiny, almost inaudible sound, a sound as soft as a breeze, but a sound that was, unmistakably, a sound of a pure and very real laughter. Elena sat up quickly. Sophie had her own small hand clapped over her mouth, as if even she couldn't believe that the beautiful and very magical sound had come from her. Her own gray eyes were wide, startled. And then another giggle, a little louder this time. Still quiet, but real. Elena said nothing. She just smiled, and she continued the puppet act, this time with a new and very real and very beautiful purpose: to make Sophie laugh again. At the same time, Ethan, who had been working in his office, had heard the sound through the cracked door. Abruptly, confused, unsure if he had imagined it, he had stepped out and he had followed the delicate, very beautiful thread of the sound of the laughter he had not heard in a year. And there, in the room, he had seen it. Elena lying on the floor, her own legs in the air, performing a ridiculous and very beautiful dinosaur show. And Sophie, his own beautiful daughter, was lying on top of her, her own small eyes bright, her lips curled, her small shoulders shaking with a soft and very real giggle. Ethan had frozen. The scene was simple, it was peaceful, but to him, it had hit like a fist to the chest. It had been so long, so very long, since he had seen her like that. His own eyes had begun to sting, with a mixture of a profound and very real joy and a deep and very painful guilt. He hadn't walked in. He had quietly stepped back and he had closed the door without a sound. Back at his desk, he had stared at the unfinished and now very meaningless architectural plans. Only that one single, solitary sound, the sound of his daughter's laughter, had echoed in his mind. It was a sound that had once been so ordinary, so taken for granted. And now it was more precious and more valuable than anything he had ever in his entire and very successful life built. That morning, the first weak rays of a sunlight after days and days of a persistent and very gray rain had filtered through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long golden stripes across the polished wooden floor. The penthouse felt brighter somehow, but the air was still heavy with an unspoken tension. Elena was in the playroom with Sophie. Today she had decided to try something new, something different. From her own worn canvas bag, she had pulled out a large, brightly colored therapy ball, a piece of a simple and very effective equipment that she had kept. For some reason, since her own long-forgotten nursing school days, she knew the routine. You have the child sit on the ball, you hold them gently, and you move with a slow and very rhythmic motion to activate the core muscles, to engage the sense of a balance. At first, Sophie had tensed, her own small body, a rigid and very resistant thing. But Elena was patient. "It's just a game," she had whispered. "It's like we are sitting on the moon." And bathed in the slanted morning light, Sophie had sat atop the ball, hugging her beloved, worn-out teddy bear, and she had begun to gently rock as Elena guided her movements. Her tiny and very weak legs had begun to engage, her small back had straightened ever so slightly. And then the door had slammed open. Ethan stood in the doorway, his own handsome eyes wide, his face flushed with a new and very different and very ugly kind of an anger. He had seen his daughter, his fragile and very precious daughter, on the large and very intimidating therapy ball, clutching her teddy bear, while Elena, the nanny, the stranger, had steadied her from behind. "What the hell?" he had roared. His own voice a booming and very terrifying sound of a pure and very real fury. "Do you think you are doing?" Elena froze. Sophie immediately recoiled, a small wounded sound escaping her lips as she clutched her teddy bear tighter. The ball came to a stop, and the room, which had been so full of a quiet, gentle progress just a moment before, turned to cold, hard stone. Ethan left the room without another word, without a single backward glance. And suddenly, the space which had been so full of a light and a laughter and a hope just a few short moments ago felt hollow, as if all the air and all the magic had been sucked out of it. Elena stood there, still and silent, her own hands resting on the soft, smooth surface of the therapy ball. A single, hot, and very silent tear fell, and then another. She wasn't crying because she had been so brutally and so publicly yelled at. She was crying because a small and very fragile, very beautiful door had just started to open, and now it had been slammed shut. Ethan had carried his daughter upstairs, and he had gently, and with a new and very unfamiliar tenderness, placed her in her crib. He had even tried to hum the lullaby, the one that his wife Anna used to sing to her. But his own heart was in a state of a profound and very real turmoil. The image of Elena, so strong, so steady, and so full of a hope that he himself had long since abandoned, unsettled him deeply. Not because she had that hope, but because he no longer did. He felt in that moment like a complete and utter failure, a powerless father. Anna's death hadn't just taken his wife. It had taken his own, very fragile belief in dreams, his own sense of a direction. And now Elena, with her quiet strength and her relentless and very gentle will, was like a mirror, a bright and very unforgiving mirror, that was reflecting every single solitary flaw he had tried so desperately and for so long to bury. He sat beside Sophie's bed, watching her sleep. They were all a constant and very painful reminder that a life, even a life that hurts, can still hold a profound and very real beauty. He stood up then, grabbed his phone, and he called his assistant. "Cancel everything for this afternoon," he had said. He needed space. He needed to think. He needed to try and fix what he had, so carelessly and so brutally just broken. He had extended his hand, an act of a pure and very real surrender from a man who had spent his entire and very lonely life in a state of a complete and very absolute control. It was a moment of a real and very profound courage on Elena. She hadn't hesitated. She had reached out and she had taken it, her own small hand gripping his firmly. And there, in the middle of the vast and very beautiful kitchen, between the half-washed dishes and the unspoken and very heavy weight of their shared and very separate grief, a new and very fragile reconciliation was born. And with it, a small and very beautiful spark of a hope, a fragile and very beautiful bloom, growing so quietly and so unexpectedly from the hard and very frozen ground. From that day forward, things inside the cold and very silent penthouse slowly began to change. It was not an overnight and very dramatic transformation. There was no magic switch that suddenly and very completely turned Ethan into the perfect and very present father. But little by little, the thick and very cold ice around his own, very broken heart began to melt. He started to come home. A little earlier, first by just a few short minutes and then by hours. He no longer locked himself away in his office all day. Instead, he would step into the playroom, and he would quietly and from a very safe distance watch as Elena read to Sophie. And he would, on occasion, and when he thought that no one was watching, allow a small and very real smile to touch, to hold in a giggle one evening as Elena was building a magnificent and very tall castle out of a set of colorful wooden blocks with Sophie. He had sat down beside them awkwardly and had picked up a small wooden piece. "Where does this one go?" he had asked, his own voice a little clumsy, a little unsure. Elena had blinked in a quiet and very real surprise. but she had kept her own face neutral. There she had pointed. On the left, that's the main castle tower. Ethan had tried to fit the piece. It was wrong. He had tried a second time. Still wrong. On the third try, the small wooden block had slipped from his own very large hands and had knocked over half of the magnificent castle. He had stared, wide-eyed, at Elena, and then at Sophie, and then his daughter had laughed. A real, clear, and very beautiful sound. And for the very first time, in a very long and very lonely year, Ethan had laughed too. He started to ask Elena more questions after that. How was Sophie today? What food did she like the most? Do you like to draw? Elena, his questions were clumsy, but they were sincere. And Elena, she would answer them, sometimes briefly, sometimes with long, and very beautiful. Stories about her own mother, about her younger brother, about the late and very happy nights in their own tiny Brooklyn apartment, where a true and very real survival had meant that they had to share everything. One evening, while the three of them sat at the table, no more Ethan eating alone in his office, he had asked quietly, "Is your family doing okay?" Elena had looked up, a simple question, but coming from Ethan, it felt enormous. She had nodded. They're getting there. My mom is stronger now. My brother's about to graduate high school. Ethan had watched her, his gaze far off. You're strong, he had said. I've never met anyone like you. Elena had smiled, just a little, but inside, something had warmed. Not from the compliment, but from the way he had said it. Not as a boss, but as a man who was learning how to connect. After dinner, as part of their new routine, they had tucked Sophie into bed together. Elena had read the story, and Ethan had sat at the edge of the bed, occasionally chiming in with a few silly lines that had made Sophie giggle. When Sophie had finally fallen asleep, they hadn't rushed out of the room. They'd stayed in a quiet, comfortable silence. Elena had looked around the room, a room that had once been a silent and very sad castle, and was now filled with a new and very beautiful light, with laughter and with hope. She had turned to Ethan. You know, she had said softly, she is not just learning how to walk again, she is learning how to live again. Ethan had just nodded, his own eyes now moist. So am I, he had said. That weekend heavy and very cleansing. Storm had rolled in. The skies over New York had turned nearly black, and the rain had pounded the city in great gray waves. The three of them had sat in the dimly lit living room, huddled together. The scent of the wet earth, the steady, rhythmic drumming of the rain, and the distant and very satisfying growl of the thunder had created an atmosphere that was both melancholic and strangely and very beautifully intimate. And for the very first time, Ethan had begun to speak of Anna, his late wife. She was the most incredible woman I have ever known, he had said, his own voice breaking. She was so full of a life. She had dreams. She was the light of my world. Elena had said nothing. She had just listened, her own eyes now misted with her own very real emotion. She understood. He needed to say these words. He needed to release himself from the immense crushing weight of the grief and of the guilt that had been so silently and so completely crushing him for so long. Elena had leaned forward then and had wrapped her own small arms around him. A simple and very beautiful hug, but it was sincere. The kind of an embrace that only someone who has truly and deeply understood a profound and very real pain could ever offer. You are not a monster, Ethan, she had whispered. You are a father who got lost, but you are trying to find your way back. And that, she had finished, is what matters. It was Elena who had suggested it. What if, she had said softly, it is not her body that is stuck? What if it is her heart, her spirit? She had read about a pediatric therapist in Seattle, a man who combined a traditional physical therapy with music, with animals, with a real and very profound emotional connection. What if we fail again? Ethan had asked, his own voice full of the fear of a new and very different kind of a hope. But what if we don't? Elena had replied. What if this gives Sophie the chance to run, to jump, to live the real and very beautiful childhood that she so richly and so completely deserves. And so, a week later, the three of them had boarded a plane, headed west, not with a certainty, but with a fragile, yet very fierce hope. The little therapy center, with its soft guitar melodies, with the beautiful and very real sound of a bird song from the woods just beyond, and with a gentle and very loving golden retriever named Maple, who had been trained to hug the children, had quietly and very beautifully become Sophie's second home. And one sunny and very beautiful day, Dr. Rivera had invited them to a nearby park for Sophie's very first outdoor therapy session. Elena had laid out a blanket. Ethan had set up a small and very hopeful tent. And Sophie had sat between them on the grass, hugging her beloved worn-out teddy bear, her own beautiful gray eyes glimmering beneath the warm afternoon sun. "Let's try something new," Elena had whispered, as she gently and with a great and very real tenderness held Sophie's small hands. Sophie had looked at her, not with a fear, but with a new and very beautiful and very real trust. Elena had lifted her carefully, and Sophie's own small legs had trembled, her back had curved just slightly, but she had stood. She had really, truly stood on her own 2 feet in a moment that was as delicate, as beautiful as the sunset light. And then a step, steady, tiny, and timeless, enough to freeze the very air around them, to make the whole entire world go quiet. He had wrapped his own strong arms around both of them, then, and Elena had cried too, not because Sophie had finally and so miraculously walked, but because the little girl, in that one single and very beautiful moment, had chosen to walk toward them. And in that one single embrace among the green and very soft grass in the warm and very gentle sun, and with the rich and very beautiful scent of the earth, they were no longer 3 separate and very broken people. They were a family. They returned to New York on a gentle autumn afternoon. The penthouse, which had once been a cold and very distant place, no longer felt that way. What had once resembled a beautiful and very lonely mausoleum of a painful and very heavy memory had finally and truly come back to life. On the table were Sophie's messy drawings. On the floor, plush toys were scattered like the witnesses of a child who was finally and truly living. Elena had stepped into the kitchen, a room that was now always scented with the warm and very beautiful smell of a toasted bread, and that was filled with the soft, happy hum of the morning radio. And Ethan, he was kneeling by the window, planting a small and very hopeful herb garden, something he had once considered to be a complete and utter waste of time. Sophie, her own small legs still a little wobbly, but stronger with each. And every passing day was running and happy and very chaotic, zigzags across the living room, calling out Elena. Elena, not loudly, but clearly. Every single day now felt like a miracle. One afternoon, the 3 of them were sitting on the balcony, sharing a bench and gazing out at the sunset. No one was speaking. There was only Sophie's soft, happy humming, an old and very familiar therapy tune, and the quiet, steady rhythm of their own hearts, beating in a new and very beautiful and very peaceful unison. That next day, Ethan had taken them to a special place. A small, beautiful house in the suburbs with a white picket fence and a garden that was full of a fragrant and very beautiful lavender. "I bought it," Ethan had said, "because I want Sophie to have a real and very beautiful childhood." Because he had added his own beautiful eyes, now full of a new, very different kind of a light. "I want you to have a real home." Elena had stood still. And Sophie, she had just run through the garden, yelling, "Bear, bear," as if she were calling to her beloved and very absent stuffed toy. And I was wondering, Ethan had hesitated, and then he had pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. It was simple, and it was elegant. "I am not asking out of an obligation," he had said. "I am asking for a chance. Will you marry me, Elena? Carter, will you be the mother of my daughter and the love of the rest of my life?" Elena hadn't answered right away. She had walked over to Sophie, and she had knelt down, and she had wrapped her own strong arms around the giggling and very happy child. And then she had turned, her own beautiful eyes, now full of her own very happy tears, but with a smile on her lips. "I have been all of those things for a while now, Ethan Blake," she had said. She had taken his hand, and she had nodded. So, among the fragrant and very beautiful lavender blooms, and with the happy and very musical laughter of a once silent and now very joyful child, a new promise was made. Not a perfect one, but the kind of a promise that is made by people who have been broken, and yet who have never ever given up on the profound and very real and very beautiful power of a hope. Life, it moves in circles, pain and hope and love and healing. They follow one another like the seasons. In their new and very beautiful family, Ethan, Elena, and Sophie, it stands as a proof that a fate can be cruel, but that nothing, absolutely nothing, is stronger than a heart that dares to hope and that refuses to surrender. Their love story was a ballad, one that didn't begin with a passion but with a brokenness. It didn't continue with roses, but with tears, and it didn't end with a happily ever after, but with a quiet and very beautiful choice. The choice to love each other every single day in the ordinary and very beautiful moments, in the smallest of things, because a hope in its purest and most beautiful form is the only thing that can truly and completely heal all of our wounds.